Previously, in Spore, with the entire universe on the brink of extinction thanks to a bunch of evil whelks, one brave hero, a pair named Fruitius Maximus, made it his mission to gather an army of the world's greatest warriors. Having recruited a crab named Mr. Pinchy, Mr. Fishfingers the salmon, Barnaby bear and Peter the penguin, along with a few more sidekicks, they ventured out into a breach in the space-time continuum, and, after passing through a mysterious realm known as the Menu, they ended up in just the place they were looking for. Will Fruitius and his crew be able to survive the perils of the Whelk Zone? Cursed by dark sorcery, the Whelk Zone was a melting pot of ashen smoke. A huge fortress built of charred stone imposed threateningly upon the burning red sky. Ranks and ranks of whelks stood snarling on the horizon, overshadowed only by their giant counterparts behind them. There were so many of them. It was a whole army. Fruitius began to question whether this was even possible. But no, he thought to himself. They had come this far, there was no backing out now. And besides, he wasn't alone. Yes, if the whelks wanted a war, they would give them a war. This was it. The time was now at hand. And, with a final rallying cry, Fruitius and the gang charged into battle. They would meet the whelks head on, but... uh-oh. Oh god. Oh no. Oh, there's too many of them. Oh god, what the hell is going on? An overwhelming amount of chaos ensued. Every member of Fruitius's crew was swamped by a wave of whelks. One moment, Fruitius was pushing through a dense crowd. The other, he was making a break between defensive lines. His friends were fighting bravely, and many whelks were being defeated. But it seemed for every whelk they took down, there were 10, maybe 20 more. Eventually, Fruitius was so surrounded that he could do nothing but spin on a mound of shells and teeth. Perhaps they had underestimated the size of the task. How could just a handful of courageous heroes take down an entire army? It seems that Fruitius's mission to save the universe was over before it ever really began. But then... a trumpet sounded from somewhere off in the distance. Fruitius thought the worst. Surely not more whelks. There was too many of them already. But what he saw made his little pear heart nearly jump from his chest. Coming over the hill was a brigade of bananas and a whole horde of Long Bois. It was incredible! How did they get here? Fruitius thought he might be hallucinating, but sure enough, the reinforcements had come in their plenty. A sea of yellow on two fronts, all streaming towards the battlefield as one. Whether he was dreaming or awake, Fruitius didn't care. They now had the numbers to do some real damage, and, in no time at all, the whelks' front line was well and truly broken. The bananas had real stamina, thanks to their high supplies of potassium, and the Long Bois were so long. So long. The question still remained, how did they get here? The answer, though, was right in front of them. It was Bananakin Skywalker. Bananakin told them he had received a call for aid from Fruitius's right-hand man, Professor Layton. He reassured Fruitius that he and his army would take care of the front lines. It was Fruitius and his friend's job then to take care of a more deadly foe. The Giant Whelks. 6 of them stood guard in front of a monumental gate. It was Fruitius's best guess that behind those walls, the mastermind of this whole crisis was waiting. If they could somehow make it through and defeat the Whelk's one true leader, their empire would crumble and the universe would be saved. Now, there was quite a few sizable issues with this plan, but the most pressing was the fact that Fruitius had only ever taken down 2 giant whelks in one place, let alone 6. Despite this though, he couldn't think of any other way. There was nothing for it. They would just have to try their best. Throwing caution to the wind, Fruitius and the gang charged forwards. The very ground beneath them shook as the giant whelks stomped up and down in fury. With all 7 of them focusing their efforts in one place, they managed to get the better of one, but it was obvious from the very beginning that they were completely outmuscled. For For now, they still had a fighting chance, but if this battle alone nearly finished them off, how were they ever going to face what was on the other side of these gates? What's more, with Fruitius' ship destroyed as they journeyed through the menu, they had no means of escape if things did get really bad. And with this in mind, Fruitius came up with a hasty plan. He instructed the two smallest and most nimble members of the team, the Elephant and the Plum, to make a dash around the side and scout out what was ahead. If they could find some point of advantage, or better yet, some unseen back route around these walls, it could allow them to bypass the giant whelks entirely. As trustworthy and noble as ever, the small elephant led his adorable plum companion around the side of the fray. They snuck through the gate and behind the wall. As they passed through, immediately in front of them was what appeared to be some form of whelk gathering. The small elephant was too afraid to check it out, and he sprinted past them before they would even notice. Because of this, as fortune would have it, he and the plum stumbled across just what they were looking for. Some kind of strange car in the shape of a jar of honey. It was a vehicle usually driven by the inhabitants of Barnaby Bear's nation. The whelks must have stolen it and brought it back here, but they were currently stripping it for parts. The small elephant wasn't going to let some whelks destroy his friend's property, and he and the plum charged in and began to wreak havoc. The two of them together made a surprisingly strong partnership, and they gave the whelks a good beating. Phew, well, that was their escape plan sorted. But just as they began to celebrate their unexpected victory, a much more menacing opponent appeared. A whelk of the giant variety. Both Elephant and Plum cowered in terror. They were done for. This was the end. But that was strange. The whelks seemed to be frozen in a sort of daze. As it turned out, this giant whelk was not quite the same as the others. His name was Wilfred, and thanks to the sheer adorableness of the two creatures in front of him, he had just regained his consciousness. Wilfred was unsure as to what was going on. The last thing he remembered, he was being turned into a giant brainless killing machine. Oh, wait, he still kind of was one. No matter, the important thing was he had his mind back. And right now, the only thing he wanted to do was help this cute little elephant and this adorable little plum. They informed him that their friends were in trouble and asked if he was willing to help. Of course, he agreed, and together they walked along the coast, ventured back around the front of the walls, and it was now Wilfred's time to shine. He used his signature fire-breathing technique to send a volley of flames into the fray. These giant whelks might have matched Wilfred in stature, but he now had something they didn't. Friends to protect, a reason to fight. Wilfred took out 2, then 3, then 4 giant whelks all by himself. But even he was not invincible, and tragically, as he faced off against his final opponent, he suffered a fatal blow. As he fell to the ground, Wilfred did not feel sad or unfulfilled, for, in his final moments, he had finally become what he always dreamed of being, the ultimate whelk hero. Thanks to Wilfred's great sacrifice, Fruitius and his crew were able to take out the final giant whelk, and it was now time to find out what lay beyond these foreboding walls. After passing through the gate, they found an ominous stone circle surrounded by a sinister magical haze. The sound of Gregorian chanting grew louder as they approached, and soon enough they were face to face with the Council of Whelks. All 5 members stood there holding their weapons of choice. One held a flaming torch, another a giant stick, the third had a magic staff, the fourth a sword, and the fifth was holding some sort of camping mallet. Maybe he was going to put up a tent or something, I don't know. 5 whelks, 5 heroes. It seems that fate had decided proceedings. And, as the first member of the council stepped forwards, it was up to Fruitius and his friends to nominate their first champion. With great courage, Mr. Pinchy proposed himself to go first. As he stepped into the ring, he thought about all the pain and struggle the giant whelks had caused his crustacean nation. The 1v1 commenced. Mr. Pinchy Jr. charged in fast and began to exact his revenge with the fury of all Mr. Pinchys before him. But then he got bored and he noticed that the whelk had dropped its weapon. Mr. Pinchy took the opportunity to swipe it from under its feet. He thought briefly about running away with it, but resolved instead to chuck it back in its face. This had no noticeable effect, but it was funny, and Mr. Pinchy was so entertained he did it again a second time. Having satisfied his terrible attention span, Mr. Pinchy did eventually decide to take the fight seriously, and he beat up the whelk in no time at all, grabbing the victory in round 1. The second member of the council stepped forwards. This time, Mr. Fishfingers volunteered. Having seen Mr. Pinchy steal the whelk's weapon, he too wanted to give this a try. He swiped the big stick from under the whelk's nose and ran around with it in his mouth. In fact, Mr. Fishfingers was having so much fun running around in circles that Fruitius Maximus decided he was taking too long and he stepped in to finish the round for him. The third round followed a similar pattern. Peter the penguin volunteered for this one, as this whelk was carrying a sword, and as a pirate, Peter was very familiar. He too was able to disarm the whelk, steal its weapon, and run around it in circles. But Peter was so nimble that the whelk fell over out of sheer dizziness, and he was able to finish it off with ease. The fourth round was no more difficult. Barnaby Bear was able to outstrength his opponent no problem. And when it came to Fruitius Maximus's turn, he was feeling a little underwhelmed. The Council of Whelks had really not been all they were cracked up to be. He supposed therefore that he would just march up to the final whelk, hit it with a quick 1-2 and then, oh god, it was shooting fireballs at him! This wasn't in the plan! Fruitius ducked and weaved as best he could, but the final whelk's fireballs were very accurate. Perhaps this was the whelk behind the whole operation. He was much tougher than the others. He didn't even flinch when his own hammer was thrown back into his face. How would Fruitius overcome such an opponent? But, oh, out of nowhere, the final whelk keeled over. Mr. Fishfingers had nipped him from behind. And with that, the Council of Whelks had been defeated. A spooky silence fell about the Whelk Zone. Had they done it? Was it over? It seemed almost too good to be true. It was all too anticlimactic. Had Fruitius's mission been completed? Unfortunately, the answer was no. Just a moment later, the peace was broken by an earth-shattering screech. And, as it happened, one final whelk still stood. This must be him, the true master behind it all. He was the Council of Whelks' most powerful member. Standing high above the rest, it was the Whelk King. It was the biggest, most humongous giant whelk any of them had ever seen. Fruitius and the crew prepared to charge into battle one final time. But before they could, the whelk shook the ground so hard that a huge plume of lava sprung from below. The gang set off running, attempting to close the distance inch by inch, whilst avoiding a barrage of flames and fireballs. The earth shuddered and spewed out more ash, but eventually, Fruitius did manage to get within striking distance. For a moment, he felt the weight of the whole universe on his shoulders, but it need only be for a moment, as, in a flash, his friends were once again by his side. They fought with all their might, shoulder to shoulder, supporting each other just as they had done all of this time. The King of Whelks snarled and snapped and screamed, but they did not give up, not for a single second. They battered the Whelk King until their arms were heavy and their knuckles raw. After everything, finally, with a thud that was heard across the totality of space, the king fell to the ground and the whelks were no more. Without its rightful ruler, the Whelk Zone became unstable. This planet was collapsing, and Fruitius and his crew needed to escape quickly. Led by the small elephant, they rushed together through thick clouds of smog, eventually reaching their honeypot-shaped getaway vehicle. They all jumped in and set off as fast as their wheels would spin. Towering infernos erupted from the soil beneath them. but Fruitius Maximus put his foot to the floor, swerved his way past the explosions towards the horizon, and drove headfirst back through the rip in space-time. Out, once again, into the unknown. And so, the story ends. Peace had been restored to even the smallest corners of this vast, magnificent universe. Millions and billions of children would grow up without fear of whelks of any form, all thanks to the endeavours of those brave few heroes. What happened next to Fruitius and his friends is a topic of much debate and speculation. Perhaps, as some said, they never made it home through that treacherous rip in space-time. Or maybe, just maybe, they had set off once more for another adventure inside the 2008 life simulation game, Spore.